Benjamin, right? From Google.
Okay.
So we're rolling this up front, or you can hit the band.
Awesome. Do you have a laser pointer as well?
Yes.
Am I allowed to point this to people or just at the screen?
Okay. Your eyes, not on the wall. Yes.
Hello. Hi. Hi. My name is Ben. I'm a doctor from the UK. And before I came to Harvard, I just finished the academic foundation program at Oxford. And I'm going to talk to you about residential segregation and colorectal cancer. So it's sort of typical to start these presentations by emphasizing how important your topic is. So I'll do that. Colorectal cancer is the third commonest cause of cancer in the US and the third leading cause of death. And by colorectal, I mean anywhere from the cecum down to the rectum. And if you are unlucky enough to be diagnosed with this, the most important predictor of what's going to happen to you is the stage at which you're diagnosed. We now know that half of all premature deaths from colorectal cancer are due to health disparities, and these can be prevented. And what I mean by that is if everyone had the same incidence and outcomes as a white person living in a northern state who was privileged with college education, then these deaths simply wouldn't occur. That's about 7,000 per year. Despite knowing this, the published literature does not dedicate half of its articles to health disparities. In fact, there's very few. And this reflects the prevailing theories of biomedical and lifestyle disease distribution. What little disparities work has been done is usually related to screening. And most commonly, it simply describes what the health disparities are, not what caused them to come around in the first place, or what are the factors that perpetuate. The last thing I'll say about this is this has not arisen in a vacuum. This is an inevitable and an intended consequence of decisions that are made by people on research funding bodies. And just to illustrate that, this is a word cloud which I made this by scraping the text from successful grant applications to the UK MRC in the field of colorectal cancer. And you can see that the MRC, which is like the UK sort of NIH on a shoestring budget, they're not interested in social disparities. What they're interested in is sort of sexy new molecular therapies. So motivated by a need to do more and better health disparities research, I set the following objectives for my practicum. I thought I'm going to look at new metrics of societal determinants, and I'm going to try and show that these disparities exist in place, and I wanted to make them literally visible on a map. And then I had this sort of humble aspiration of making some kind of actionable conclusions for my practicum. I didn't want it just to be an academic exercise. So this is the sort of ID 360 slide of methods that I've prepared. I looked at the SEER database of the last 5 years. I included everyone with a new diagnosis of colorectal cancer. My outcome was whether you were diagnosed with late-stage disease. And by late stage, that simply meant did you have metastases when you're diagnosed. That's about 20% of people overall. The exposure that I was interested in was what county you lived in, and I linked that to the US Census and the American Communities Survey, and I calculated metrics of spatial social polarization, which is sort of a sociology term for de facto segregation in the 21st century. So what did my data look like? I had just under 200,000 participants, and I collected data on the individual's case, the tumours that they had, and where they lived. And as we discussed in Sally's talk, I had a bit of a missing data problem as well. And this is a map of my missing data. So the way you can look at this is essentially a spreadsheet viewed from 30,000 feet and turned on its side. So on this axis are just observations, and then the variables are here on the y-axis. So blue means that I had all of the information, and then green means that I was missing something. So I was missing about 20% of people's grade, so I just dropped grade, as you suggested earlier. And I was missing stage for 10% and insurance for 5%. And I decided that I would go down the route of multiple imputation. That's something that I'm doing at the moment, but I'm going to present to you some of my early results that are just based on the complete case analysis today. So I hinted that I was interested in segregation earlier, but how do you measure segregation? And there's a lot of kind of controversy about how this should be done. So I used these new metrics called the index of concentration at the extremes, or ICE metrics, and I calculated segregation on income, race, and then combined race and income, which is really meant to demonstrate how socioeconomic status and race intersect, and to try and reflect the kind of empiric social reality of America today. So what does that look like? So this map shows racialized economic segregation in America by county. The most privileged, so these are the whitest, highest income counties, are in the light red, and the lowest income, blackest counties are in dark red here.
That's the combined.
That's combined. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit further. This is the whole of the US, and then this is the state of Georgia, which I had in my SEER data set. This is actually the same ICE metric. I've just gone from a sequential to a diverging color scheme, which highlights the areas of least privilege and the areas of most privilege. I have never been to the state of Georgia, and I didn't go. So I did the next best thing, which is I used Google Maps. So I dropped a pin in this green area up here, and I took a photo of the first house, and I promise you, this is the first house that I saw.
Did you make these maps on this?
Yeah. So this looks like a very nice house, and this is a leafy suburb of North Atlanta, it turns out. And then I looked down in one of the rural towns, and this was the first house that I came across.
Still maybe.
I haven't used a filter on this either, I promise. It's amazing, even the sun is shining. But on a more serious note, this meant that the metrics that I was using was actually reflecting what I wanted it to measure. So what has this got to do with colorectal cancer? So these are the odds of late-stage diagnosis. The reference group is the most privileged. This is North Atlanta, if you like. And then as you move into counties of less privilege, your odds of late-stage diagnosis increase by about 10%. This is just on grounds of income. When I looked on race, I found what was essentially a U-shaped relationship. So the lowest risk was for racially diverse counties, and that sort of makes sense. That's LA and New York, and that's confounded by income, essentially. Being in an all-white county, like in Kentucky, or an all-black county, increased your odds. And finally, the main result. Combining income and race as an intersection increased your odds the most. So what I hope this does is this sort of reframes our thinking of what are the causes of disease distribution in populations, and help us to move away from thinking about diet and genes and lifestyle towards societal determinants of health. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what those might be and what policies we could use to intervene. One example that I came up with was the number of primary care physicians. So I looked at how many primary care physicians were in each county. As you move from the least privilege to more privilege, at each step, you have access to more primary care physicians. This is on the log scale to show you that it's stepwise. I couldn't actually fit on one plot the number of doctors on the arithmetic scale. So the median number of doctors in the most privileged counties was 69 compared to just 43. Okay, so final thoughts. This work has a few limitations. Obviously, it's just research in progress, but I was using administrative data. It's cross-sectional, so I can't really make any inference about cause. It's just association. And there's also a risk of ecological fallacy. But we try to get around that by using multi-level modeling techniques. And there are some difficulties in how you define segregation, and there's some controversy about that in sociology. I've got a few things to do. I've got to complete my multiple imputation. I didn't mention this, but colorectal cancer is obviously a screenable cancer, and there is effect modification in these results based on age. So if you're over the age of 50, you actually are not affected very much by where you live because of screening. But if you're under the age of 50, your odds are more like 25%. They're almost doubled. So, conclusions. I'd really like to draw some actionable conclusions for my practicum and for any paper that I might write eventually. I'd love to hear what you guys would suggest might be possible health policy interventions for addressing residential segregation. These are a few of my suggestions. I'd love to know what you think. And I'll take any questions. I'd just like to thank George Chen, my supervisor in the SBS department, and the work of Nancy Krieger, which underpins a lot of what I presented today.
So open it up for questions. It's super cool. I think it's a really interesting way to look at that. I think it's much more nuanced than just sort of looking at economics alone. Could you look at, like, as you were saying, gastroenterologists and colorectal surgeons? It may not be that PCPs are probably going to catch it later on, unless they're going to do blood testing, which they wouldn't necessarily be doing. So you kind of need a gastroenterologist around to do that.
Sure, sorry, I'm sure you
There's also been, recently, maybe in the past couple months, more literature about earlier diagnosis of colorectal, the incidence of colorectal cancer in younger people is going up, which sort of gets to some of what you were saying about the importance of increasing access to people. So people who are supposed to get screened are getting screened, which is a good thing, but it is presenting in younger and younger people, which means that we're preferentially apparently some people who are at the, the lower ends of the economic range.
Yeah, lots of good things in there. So there was a big paper that came out showing that the incidence of premature diagnoses and deaths of colorectal cancer is increasing, so this makes it sort of topical, which is great for me. You mentioned secondary care physicians, and that has been very tightly correlated with income. I haven't looked at it here, but if I could find data on it, I would definitely look at that, and I'm sure it would probably show the same relationship as well.
Looking for the policy implications, this is probably something you've already thought about, but if not, it's probably worth adding to the discussion that the effect measure modification, I think, is particularly relevant. If you are focusing, therefore, on the 25% increase in odds among people under the age of 50, you could, using a quality of life argument or quality of life years lost argument, demonstrate a really strong case, I think, for increasing access for a younger population who live in racial segregation. It's probably something you've already thought about. But
No, I think that's exactly it. And I also think having it on a map in place as well is useful because it tells you where you actually need to have these interventions.
So you're going to impute grade and stage? Or just,
No, I'm dropping grade.
okay, so just stage. But
Stage and insurance then.
Stages, and stage insurance. Those are like your two primary things that you're really interested in. I guess just like in terms of like patient stuff, it might make sense to include a sensitivity analysis about the imputed.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Because obviously it's like your primary thing that you're looking at, then where's
Exactly.
imputing?
One other sub-analysis that might be interesting, we usually see in access to care for cystectomy for bladder cancer, and something that we looked at was whites living in predominantly white communities, whites living in predominantly black communities, and the reverse is from a sub-analysis, and it's a way to kind of control for regions. So you could say, Agronics region has different characteristics within there, so that's kind of another way to separate out race and socioeconomics. Because in our analysis, we found that black people living in a predominantly white area have worse outcomes than white people living in a predominantly black area.
guess gets to the intersection of like race and income in a way.
Yeah.
And also if you think about it for like healthcare and stuff, a lot of advertising is based on like the demographics of your like regional area. So if you look at like health advertising within a predominantly white area, it's different than health advertising within a predominantly minority area. And some people have kind of postulated that like you're getting a lot of information, like you need to get your colorectal cancer screening, like that kind of stuff, but like maybe less affluent areas aren't really getting the benefit of being like told that they need to be getting this kind of care.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a way to try to capture the cultural stuff. And you're also a little bit capturing.
But it might not even be that it might be, institutionalized racism causes these people to be less trusting of the establishment, so they're less likely to go to get screenings. And I think the reason why you only have 3 or 4 articles or grants based on socioeconomic status or health disparities is because there's not a whole lot of political motivation to do anything, especially now. There's at least 50% of people in Congress that don't care.
There's a bill that's going to Congress through HUD to withdraw federal funding at the moment from all geospatial databases that investigate racial inequities. In-house.
But you can still do it if you bring in everything else. So you're bringing in economic, that's one of 3 bills, but you're bringing in economic, education, and race, then you can do it.
Yeah.
The point was not to build a database specifically for housing affirmative. So it's really not quite as bad as I think the advocates made it look, because you can still do your research, the type of research you're doing. That's still funded. So. I just don't want you to worry about that.
I think that was amazing, and I'm just wondering, are you looking at maybe, or thought about looking at other variables that might also intersect with that, like health literacy or other social determinants that, because I think this is really cool, like the way you're showing how these two interact.
Okay. When you say other variables, you mean looking at other things that change by county that could be mediating the effects of segregation on the individual's risk of cancer?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I would like to look at. And I'm going to suggest health literacy. Literacy sounds like a great one. But it's just finding data sources that have county and information on these kind of areas.
Yeah.
So the census data, because the information by census tract, actually. County, I don't know if you use census data.
Yeah, so I use census data. SEER only goes down to county level.
Right. Well, thank you very much. That's great. There's our 4th presenter. 4. Wow.